Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Tirthankar and myself, just a word of thanks to Dakshesh Bhai and Mr. Mazumdar for inviting us to speak to what clearly appears to be a very educated audience on the markets. Actually, it's funny, this place has a particular attachment to me. This was about 30 years ago, I think, that I was in this very room doing a course on public speaking. And probably standing right here, the professor said, come up and speak for 2 minutes on anything. Must have been the most fearsome 2 minutes of my life as I started to do that. And then a couple of months later came and did a photography course, which I still continue to do, and I've just got back from Africa and done, hopefully taken some fabulous pictures. But anyway, so this place is close to my heart. I understand we've got about 30 minutes to do a little chit-chat on what we think is the state of the markets. I'll talk for about 15 minutes. And I'll give you a perspective on what's happening globally, because I have a firm belief that many of us here are so focused on what's actually happening in India and perhaps miss the point that India is very much part of what's happening globally, and what happens globally has a direct impact on India. And Tirthankar, who is obviously a lot more experienced than I am in terms of India, will talk about what's happened in India and perhaps how to look at Indian equities and how to try and outperform in what is generally a very difficult market. But I think his doctorate in this science will certainly be a lot more helpful than I can be. We've obviously, markets, we've seen the last 3 weeks, massacre and madness, I think, would be the apt way to describe it. Massacre because there's been probably $10 trillion of wealth that's been eroded in the last 3 weeks. And madness because, frankly, I think it's all overdone. I honestly believe nothing really changed in the last 3 weeks that there should be a $10 trillion or $12 trillion of wealth erosion. So I really think we're at that stage. That doesn't mean we can't have a little bit more of it in the next month or so, but generally I think it's just massively overdone. So what have we got globally that we're dealing with that's sort of causing some of these issues? Obviously, we've got a massive slowdown coming in the US. If you look at the graph on the top, that's the movement in house prices. And if you go back about 15 years, except the last 2 or 3 years, most of the spending that was happening in America was happening on the back of house price gains. So what America was doing was, okay, my house, which was valued at 100, is now 120. I had a mortgage of 80 against a house value of 100. It's now gone to 120. I can go borrow another 20. So they were borrowing and spending the equity value that they were taking out of their properties. That's what kept the American economy going for the last 15 years. That has come to a standstill. Right? So the driver of consumer spending, which is 2/3 of the American economy, was driven by taking money out of your property. So if you look at this slide, obviously that story is over. The graph at the bottom is also telling you that the market, the 10-year treasury, is a great barometer of what's going to happen economically. So the 10-year interest rate in America is now almost on par with what it was in the heart of the crisis. So the markets in the US are telling you that there's a good chance of a US recession. Now, obviously we'll talk about what that means to India, but I'm just putting some framework around what's happening in the US. And at the same time, with US interest rates at 0 to 25 basis points, your options to create a movement up in macroeconomics in the US is limited, because they've now signed this debt ceiling agreement. Your ability to spend yourself out of a recession is seriously hampered. So your policy options, both monetarily and fiscally, are very limited. So the US is looking bleak. So the question is, will there be a QE3? Right now, commentators are saying there is no QE3. The markets are saying there will be a QE3. My view is, as a commentator, you have no choice but to have a QE3. So the question to ask is, in the last QE1 and the last QE2, what was the impact? And I think you'll find the impact generally has been a reflation of equity markets, reflation of commodities, but no reflation of macroeconomics. So actually it's a scary thought, right? That QE3 might reflate asset values again, but may not necessarily reflate the economy. So something to think about, that your equity values go up, but macroeconomic growth is low, consumer spending continues to be low. So QE3, in my opinion, is coming. So the S&P, which is sort of the Sensex equivalent or the Nifty equivalent, was up 20% in QE1, up only 9% in QE2. Emerging market equities, developed market equities, 60, 70, 80% up in QE1, less so in QE2. And QE2 did almost nothing for employment as well. So something to thank you. Something to bear in mind as we go forward, that almost nothing to employment rates. And actually employment is a good barometer of what consumer spending is all about.